Let me talk a little bit. I was asked by the organizers to talk about the broad U.S. approach over the last 15 months. Then I'll come back to the specific idea on American leadership. And if I look at how the U.S. policy is organized in the last few months, I guess I would break it down into three terms: deter, constrain, engage. And I'll take each of those in order. First, deter is primarily about NATO and building NATO capabilities in view of the fact that it's important that the alliance ensure that Russia does not make a miscalculation that what it has done in Ukraine, it could try against a NATO member. Now, I don't think it's a high probability event that you'll see the Russian army in a Baltic state or even little green men, but it's not zero probability, and NATO needs to plan accordingly. So you have seen a number of actions led by the United States over the last 15 months. The Wales Summit took a number of steps. The Rapid Reaction Force. You now have small American deployments on the ground. The U.S. term is persistent. That equates to permanent in each of the Baltic states and Poland. You will soon have pre-positioning of American equipment in Europe. And it's basically designed to send a signal to Russia that NATO will defend its territory. The second part, constrain, refers to states like Ukraine that are caught or between institutional Europe, between NATO and European Union on the one hand, and Russia on the other. And it's steps to help those states become more resilient so that they can better resist Russian mischief-making, but also steps to penalize Russia for actions until you get a change in course in Russian policy. And I think the United States is doing some things here. It could and should be doing more. And so with regards to Ukraine, and I would put this in the context of the Budapest Memorandum, which the minister mentioned, which I believe obligates the United States and Britain to take certain actions to be supportive of Ukraine. In terms of political support, I would give the U.S. government high marks. There's high-level contact. The Vice President's been here, I think, 3 times in the last 14 months. And so I think that's positive. In terms of economic and financial support, the United States and European Union worked with the International Monetary Fund to shape a very important program for Ukraine. But I would also say that the United States needs to be prepared, as does the European Union, to go beyond that, and that additional financial assistance for Ukraine may be necessary. The West needs to be prepared to provide that, provided that Ukraine is doing the necessary steps in terms of economic reform. And the West should undertake that because preventing economic collapse in Ukraine is going to be far cheaper for the West than dealing with the consequences. Other steps I think the United States should take. I think the United States is doing some things in terms of military support. There are 300 American troops at Yavoriv training the Ukrainian National Guard. Though I would argue, and I have argued, that the United States should be doing more, including military assistance. I was part of a group that put out a report in February on the subject in Washington, and looking at military assistance, which would mainly be non-lethal. When we were here in January talking to the minister and talking to people in the Ukrainian military, a lot of the requests were for non-lethal equipment, secure communications, counter-battery radars, reconnaissance drones. But also there was a request for one item which to fill a gap in the Ukrainian inventory, which was man-portable light anti-armor weapons. And I do believe that the United States should change its policy, which currently is now non-lethal assistance only, and begin providing those weapons to Ukraine. And then a fourth part of this is really focused on Russia, and that is it's going to be important that the United States and the European Union maintain the economic sanctions on Russia and be prepared to increase those sanctions if there's a renewed offensive in the East or if Moscow does not do its part to implement the terms of the Minsk II agreement. I think the economic sanctions have had a significant impact on the Russian economy. They have not yet achieved their political objective, which is a change in Russia's political course. But as long as the sanctions continue to apply, I think the economic pain in Russia increases. And then the third part is engage. And I think the Vice President talked about it yesterday at Brookings when Vice President Biden said, there are going to be areas with Russia where we cooperate, but we can't do it if it means sacrificing principles. And I think that's a very important statement by the Vice President. It seems to me that you want to keep the line of communication open to Moscow. You want to leave the door open for a settlement, because at the end of the day, and I think the minister would agree with me, Ukraine can't have normalcy if the Russians don't want it. The Russians have too many levers, military, economic, energy, to make life difficult here. So you want to leave the door open. The problem that Ukraine faces, and also the West faces, is that so far Russia has shown no readiness to accept a settlement on terms that would be remotely acceptable to Ukraine, or that would be remotely reasonable. And that suggests that the West is going to have to pursue its policy for some time to come. Finally, just one last word on American leadership, because I think there is some frustration here in Ukraine that there is not a more active American role. And let me try to explain how I think Washington sees it. If you're Barack Obama and you're looking at your inbox, first of all, you want to focus on domestic issues. But when you look at foreign policy issues, there's not only Ukraine, there's ISIS, Iraq, Syria, Iran nuclear program, China. And there has been a desire to try to encourage Europe to take the lead on this. And this is not just the Obama administration. This goes back to the George W. Bush administration, even the Clinton administration, the desire to see Europe play a political role commensurate with its economic weight. And so there has been this desire. The United States has not been directly involved in the Minsk negotiations. I'm not sure, had Americans been there in February, that it would have changed the outcome much. But what I do hope is that if an opportunity arises where more direct American involvement could lead to a dramatically new approach that would open up a possibility of real settlement, I would hope that the U.S. government would be prepared in that case to get more directly involved. And my guess is that Washington, in those circumstances, would be so inclined.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed for that. And